Hey there, hi there, ho there. Okay, this is going to be the last lecture in medical ethics. The handout is already up, and the discussion question is up, and the final paper topic is up. So after you've gone through this video, watch this video, please consult all of those things. The final paper due date is December 11th at end of day, so 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, December 11th. Okay, now to our last lecture. Yay! Okay, Law at the Limits of Life, Richard Huxtable's chapter. Huxtable argues that clinical ethics, ethical support, and not just the support of legal and medical professionals, should have a role in determining the outcomes of legally, ethically, and medically contentious cases. Huxtable notes that sometimes the law, in rendering judgments about patients' quality of life, is just makes the wrong decisions, runs the risk of that. So he says that medical ethicists should be involved in court cases. Now, the context of the case is that of Charlotte Wyatt. Charlotte Wyatt's is not a good story. Basically, Charlotte Wyatt was born prematurely with many medical problems in her lungs, brain, liver, heart, and kidneys. In the first years of her life, she had to be resuscitated 3 times. The doctors concluded that that she would not have normal neurological development and that her existence would be intolerable. Well, Charlotte's parents, who weren't exactly model parents, they later split up, and they had issues. They took this to the court many times, saying that doctors should resuscitate Charlotte if she were to expire. The court sided with the doctors and said, hey, if Charlotte's going to expire, let her expire under natural causes. Do not resuscitate, was essentially the order given. As it turns out, Charlotte lived. But, well, she's existing. That's about all there is to that. Now, what does that have to do with medical ethics? Well, Huxtable says, well, the law itself is really confused. That means who should regulate the lawgivers? What principles should the lawgivers use to determine whether or not their legal determinations are just? That means, like, what should a judge be considering when he's making a ruling about a medical ethics case? That's the essential question. And Huxtable says, well, philosophers have said there are 3 conditions that a judge should take into account in addition to all the evidence of the trial in the particular case. Now, what are these 3 conditions? 1, the law should have formal rationality. That means the law is consistent. Another way of saying that, the law shouldn't come up with contradictory rulings. If it should have certain principles and adhere to these principles at all times. Philosophers would simply say the law should be self-consistent. The second principle, the law should also involve instrumental rationality. The law, and this means the law can adapt itself to address new and unforeseen events in the world. The law can adapt itself to new circumstances, like the birth of Charlotte Wynne. This means the law can be adaptable. So the 2 principles so far, formal rationality and instrumental rationality. The third principle is, that the law should be substantively rational. What does this mean? This means that the law should have some substantive moral aim or end. What does substantive mean in this case? Substantive just means it should have some sort of moral aim. It should say something important about morality. This means, more directly, the law should not just be some arbitrary set of rules. The law should assert justice. Now, that the law shouldn't just be for the sake of the law, but it should have some sort of moral aim. Okay, now moving to the latter sections of the chapter, does this work with Charlotte Wyatt if we apply these three principles, these three types of rationality? The answer is, for Huxtable, no. The first, formal rationality, basically says, look life is intrinsically good. That's a principle. Now, if life is intrinsically good, then you should try to save Charlotte Wyatt's life at all costs. Second principle, if the law only works on instrumental rationality, only values the use of someone, what use can they be to society, then maybe Charlotte Wyatt, well, she's not going to become a full-fledged member of society in the sense that she's probably not going to get a job, she's probably not going to be able to vote, she's going to not serve a real purpose in society. Now, that might sound harsh and you might not like it, but that's basically the principle that, or instrumental rationality that the law thinks. The third principle is, the life has self-determined value. This is the big old autonomy thing. This says a person should themselves be allowed to make their own decisions about how best to look after themselves. A person should be regarded as a rational agent. This should sound very familiar to you. Well, if we were to take this and we say, well, Charlotte Wyatt should be allowed as a living being, she should be given full-fledged autonomy, and that means, by this third condition, the law shouldn't have anything to say about whether or not she lives or dies. It should be up to Charlotte, not the law, not the medical doctors, not the healthcare professionals. It should be up to Charlotte and Charlotte's choice alone whether or not she wants to live or die. Now we can see here, if we take these three conditions together, formal rationality, instrumental rationality, and substantive rationality, this means, the law can't really come up with a clear and distinct answer to the question of what should we do with Charlotte Wyatt. Huxtable says, who could solve this problem and who could guide the judges, who could influence the judges, who could say important things to the judges? Philosophers, ethicists, medical ethicists more specifically, might be able to say something important about this. Why? Because they know the history of all the philosophy behind it, and they could perhaps make the judge aware of this, make the judge aware of the arguments surrounding formal rationality, instrumental rationality, and substantive rationality, and that might really help yield better outcomes for contentious legal cases, like the case of Charlotte Wyatt. So Huxtable's final and only really moral claim here is that ethicists should help instruct lawyers and judges in the sense that ethicists might help resolve the apparent contradictions that are apparent in the law when the law has to address contentious cases. And that is it for the lecture. That is it for the lectures of the course. Please check out the handout, answer the discussion question, check out the final paper topics, I think I suggested 10 possible topics. Pick one of them, write about it. I'm going to spend a few moments talking about the term paper now, so this lecture is going to be a bit long, 3 more minutes maybe. Okay, your term paper, I want it to be 7 to 10 pages long, double-spaced. I want you to pull out certain aspects of the text, certain chapters of the text, and discuss them directly. I want you to have footnotes in your paper. So I want you to quote something and then cite it in a footnote. Look at the Chicago style to figure out how that is. There's a link provided on the assignment. Next thing, your paper should have a strong thesis statement right at the top. Your thesis statement should tell me what you're going to argue, how you're going to argue it, identify the key points of your argument. Third, it should show how these points link together. And fourth, it should state a very strong conclusion. Here's what my argument will produce. Here's what I will say at the end of my paper. That should be in your first paragraph. Then you basically you go about doing that. I left the topics pretty wide open, and I hope they're interesting to you. I hope you find some of them interesting. And I want you to write on one of them, and I want you to reference chapters in the text and hopefully some other source. And this source cannot be a blog post, it cannot be a magazine, it cannot be a newspaper article, it can't be something you found on the internet when you're sitting in your pajamas. It has to be something from a peer-reviewed journal or another philosophy text. And basically that's it. It has been a blast teaching this course, and it has been really fun for me to do this. I hope you learned something. I hope it wasn't too boring and terrible and painful for you. Let me say just one thing. Medical ethics is hugely important. Some of you are healthcare professionals. Some of you want to be healthcare professionals. Currently, you'll notice a different background here. My mom, I'm doing this from Canada. My mom is in the hospital up here dealing with a pretty serious illness. And I spend my days now in the hospital with her. And I must say, medical doctors and nurses and all the healthcare staff, the job they do, it's the most amazing thing in the world. And I hope that this class has taught you something about how better to be a healthcare professional. And I hope you've learned something and had a bit of fun doing it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for doing all your assignments. I look forward to reading your term papers. I think they're going to be awesome. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.